The week my brother demanded $15 million from me, my mother set the table with the good china she'd bought on my credit card 11 years ago. She didn't remember that part. She set each plate like she was laying out a case for who in this family deserved nice things. My brother got the head of the table, the way he always had. I got the chair by the drafty storm door with the latch that never caught right. My name is on a house my parents say they bought their son. It has been on it for 11 years. Nobody at that table knew it yet. But here's what none of them remembered, and what this whole story turns on: who had actually been holding that house up the whole time. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the quietest move I ever made was the most powerful thing I've ever done. Welcome back to Silent Revenge Stories. I'm Georgia, 34, and I built a home care company out of one client and a used sedan. This is the Christmas my family learned what quiet had really bought. If you've ever been the strong one nobody thought to thank, this story is for you. I drove down from Columbus the Sunday before Christmas, the way I had every year since I left. An hour and 15 minutes of flat gray highway, then the turn onto my parents' street in Dayton. Same wreath, same plastic reindeer leaning in the yard. Inside, the starburst clock over the table ticked the way it had my whole childhood. Loud in the quiet between things people meant to say. My mother Carol was pulling a clove-studded ham out of the oven. "Georgia," she said, not turning around. "Set the table with the good china. It's in the hutch." I opened the hutch and there it was. Cream plates with thin gold rims. I remembered the store. I remembered the card I'd handed the clerk at 23 because my mother's was acting up and my brother needed the good stuff for his housewarming. I never got paid back. I never asked. I lined the plates up anyway, gold rims catching the light. 6 settings. My brother at the head. Me by the door. My father Dennis came in smelling like the garage and clapped me on the shoulder like I was a delivery that arrived on time. "There she is," he said. "The busy one." That was always my name in this house. The busy one. The capable one. The one who didn't need anything. I'd paid for more of this room than anyone sitting in it knew. And I was about to find out exactly how much that was worth to them. You learn the math of a family young. Mine was simple. When my brother Brett wanted to go back to school at 26, my parents paid his tuition twice because the first time didn't take. When his apartment got too expensive, they covered his rent for 2 years and called it a hard season. When his truck got repossessed, my father drove out at dawn and paid the lot in cash so the neighbors wouldn't see. I learned all of this secondhand at holidays, told as warm family stories. My own hard seasons I handled alone, because that was the role. At 18, I asked my mother to co-sign a $400 deposit on a studio apartment. She looked at me over her coffee and said the line I would hear in 100 shapes over the years. "Honey, we can only ever back one horse." She meant Brett. She always meant Brett. She believed like scripture that a son carried a family forward and a daughter carried herself. So I carried myself. I worked doubles. I paid that deposit out of tips. And every Christmas, I drove down and watched the one horse get a little more. I told myself it didn't touch me anymore. That Sunday, lining up gold-rimmed plates I'd paid for, I almost believed it. Then my mother smiled at me, too sweet, and asked how the little caregiving business was doing. And I understood, the way you understand weather, that something was already moving. She'd never once asked before. I just didn't know yet what she'd heard. Here's how I got out, in case you think I was the kind of woman who sat in that drafty chair and took it. I left at 18 with 2 duffel bags and a CNA certificate I'd paid for myself. Certified Nursing Assistant. It meant I could bathe a stranger, lift a grown man who'd fallen, sit with someone at 3 in the morning when the fear came. My first real client was a 91-year-old woman named Patricia Vance, and she changed the shape of my life. Patricia had buried a husband and outlived 2 of her own children, and she did not suffer foolishness, including mine. The first week, I apologized for everything. I apologized for the traffic, for the weather, for taking up space. Patricia set down her tea and looked at me. Stop that, she said. People treat you at the price you put on yourself. You're handing yourself out for free. I never forgot it. I started charging what my hours were worth. I started saying no. Patricia became the closest thing to a real mother I'd ever had, which is a strange thing to say about a client. But family is mostly who shows up. I spent 8 years learning the one thing my own parents never taught me: being needed is not the same as being loved. And you can be both the strongest person in a room and the one carrying it. I just hadn't yet learned how to put the room down. That lesson was still coming. It came wearing a Christmas sweater with my mother's voice behind it. The signature happened when I was 23. By then, I had something my parents suddenly needed. A clean credit history and a little saved. My brother had found a house in Dayton, a starter ranch with a maple in the yard, and he wanted it badly. The problem was Brett. 2 repossessions, a credit score in the basement, a job he'd had for 6 weeks. No lender would touch him alone. So my parents drove up to Columbus on a Saturday with a folder and a plan. "We just need your name on it," my mother said, sliding papers across my kitchen table. "It's a formality. You've got good credit. It protects the family." My father added the part that got me. "You'd be helping your brother build something. He needs the leg up. You've already got yours." I was 23. I wanted more than anything to finally be the daughter who helped instead of the one who was simply expected to be fine. So I signed. Not as a cosigner. They put me on as a co-borrower, my name beside Brett's like a partner. I put $4,000 of my own savings into the down payment because the gift money fell through at the last minute. They told me I'd be taken off in a year or 2 once Brett got on his feet. I believed them. That was the last time being trusting cost me, because I learned. But the signature stayed. And so did my name. For 11 years, on a house everyone in my family would swear up and down they bought their son. Here's the trap, and it's a real one. When you're a co-borrower, you can't just walk away. The only way your name comes off a mortgage is if the other person refinances the entire loan into their name alone. And to refinance, Brett had to qualify on his own. He never could. Every time I pushed, the answer came back the same from the bank. His income wasn't steady. His credit was a wreck. So I had a choice that wasn't a choice. If Brett missed a payment and the loan defaulted, it wouldn't just sink him. It would crater my credit too. The credit I was using to build a company from nothing. So when he fell short, which was often, I quietly made up the difference. A few hundred here, 1,200 there. I logged every dollar in a notebook I kept in my desk. Not because I planned to use it. But nurses chart everything. You write down what you give so you don't lose track of yourself. Brett never knew. My parents never knew. They were too busy telling the neighbors how they bought their son a house to notice that the credit holding it up belonged to the daughter they swore didn't need a thing. The golden son was living on the strong daughter's name. He just couldn't see the floor he was standing on. While I was quietly holding up Brett's house, I was building my own thing, and nobody asked about it once. It started with Patricia when her regular agency kept sending different aides who didn't know her medications. I started covering the gaps myself, off the clock, then on. Other families in her building heard. They wanted someone steady, someone who showed up, someone who treated their mother like a person and not a task on a sheet. I hired 1 aide, then 3. I named the company Hearthstead Home Care, because a hearth is what a house is built around, and I'd spent my life making other people's houses warm. I ran it out of a used sedan with 200,000 miles on it and a folding table in my apartment. I learned payroll at midnight. I learned scheduling, billing codes, state licensing, the whole brutal arithmetic of caring for people for a living. 8 years later, Hearthstead had 90 caregivers across 3 counties, and we were known as the agency that didn't drop you. That reputation was the asset. A larger health services group came calling the way they do when something small is run well. They wanted to buy. I spent 4 months in due diligence holding my ground on the one term I refused to drop: every caregiver kept their job. The day the deal closed, Hearthstead sold for $25 million. I sat in my car in the parking garage and called Patricia. Not my mother. Patricia. She was the only person I wanted to tell. Good, she said. Now don't you dare let anyone make you feel small for it. I should have written that down, too. The sale closed in late September, 3 months before that Christmas. I told almost no one. People assume you announce a thing like that you'd want the family to finally see you. I didn't. I knew exactly what would happen the day my family learned there was money. Money doesn't change who a family is. It just turns up the volume. So I kept it close. I paid off my own mortgage in Columbus. I set most of the rest aside, untouched. And I did the careful thing I want you to notice. I called the bank that held Brett's loan and asked again what it would take to get my name released. Same answer. Brett had to refinance. Brett still couldn't. So I left it and told myself I'd deal with the house in the new year. I almost made it. What I didn't account for was my sister-in-law Ashley. She had a habit of scrolling, and she scrolled past something with my company's name in it. A local business write-up. Hearthstead Home Care acquired an 8-figure deal. My face small in the corner. She read it twice. Then she picked up the phone and called my mother. And the storm door of that whole year blew open, latch broken, the way it always was. The second my own phone started ringing more than it had all year, I understood. The family I'd been invisible to for 34 years had just become very interested in me. My mother called that Tuesday, sweet as the ham. We never see you anymore. Come down early this year. Brett texted, which he never did, something cheerful with too many exclamation points. My father called to ask if my car situation was all right, which was his way of circling money without saying it. I watched it all happen with a strange calm because I'd predicted every move. I look at a stairway and see where someone could go down. I looked at my family and saw exactly where this was heading. What I hadn't decided yet was what I was going to do when we got there. The calls kept coming and kept changing shape. First it was love, then it was need. By the second week of December, my mother had stopped pretending the calls were about missing me. Your brother's having a hard stretch, she said. You know how the house eats money. I knew better than she did how the house ate money. I'd been feeding it for 11 years. He's proud, he won't ask, she went on. But a family helps. You're in a position now. There it was. The position. He could use a little help getting current. You don't need it. He does. She said it the way she'd said it my whole life. Like a law of nature. As if need were the only currency that counted, and capability disqualified you from care. I sat at my kitchen table in Columbus, the same table where I'd signed those papers at 23, and I felt something old and tired finally go cold and clear. I didn't argue. Arguing was the old role, the one where I explained myself and lost anyway. Instead, I said I'd think about it. And then I did something I'd never done in 34 years of being the busy one. I called a lawyer. Not to fight them. To understand exactly where I stood on a house I'd been quietly holding up since I was a kid myself. The attorney's name was Aaron Webb, and his office was above a bakery, which I took as a good sign. He was calm the way men get from watching families do their worst to each other for 30 years. I laid it all out. The co-borrower's signature. The down payment. 11 years of quiet payments. The notebook. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. Let me make sure I understand, he said. You're not a cosigner. You're a co-borrower. Your name is on the note and very likely on the title. He let that sit. That's not nothing, Miss Palmer. That's ownership. I'd spent 11 years thinking of myself as Brett's safety net. Aaron was telling me I was on paper half of that house. So what can I do? He spread his hands. You could sue your brother to recover the payments you've covered. You could petition to force a sale and recover your share. That path had a satisfying weight. The lawsuit, the reckoning, dragged Brett's debts into the open and let him drown in them. Aaron must have seen something cross my face because he added gently, but noise keeps you tied to that house longer. And to them. Think about what you actually want to walk away with. I told him I'd think about it. I was getting good at that line. Before I left, Aaron drew me a clearer picture, and it's the hinge this whole story turns on. A cosigner, he said, owes the debt but owns nothing. They're just a name the bank can chase. A co-borrower is different. You owe the debt and you own a share. You have rights. You can't be removed without your consent and you can't simply be erased. Then he told me the part that mattered most. The only clean way for your name to come off that loan is for your brother to refinance it entirely into his own name. And to do that, he has to qualify on his own. We looked at each other. We both knew Brett. In 11 years, Aaron said carefully, has your brother's financial picture improved enough to qualify for that house alone today? I almost laughed. Brett had refinanced 3 times that I knew of, each time pulling cash out, each time leaning harder on the equity my payments had protected. His house was a tower of borrowing with my name holding the bottom brick. No, I said. He can't qualify alone. He never could. Aaron nodded slowly, like a man watching a problem solve itself. Then you have more leverage than you think. The question isn't whether you can act. It's how loud you want to be when you do. I drove back to Columbus that afternoon with 2 roads in front of me. The loud one, the lawsuit, the public unburdening of everything Brett had hidden. And another one, quieter, that I couldn't quite see yet. That night, I did what I do best. I charted. I pulled every record I had access to as a co-borrower and laid Brett's loan history out on my kitchen table. The original loan had been modest. Then came the refinances. Each one pulled cash out. A boat 1 year. A business opportunity another. The tuition my parents thought they'd paid outright had actually been rolled into the house once, quietly. Every time the balance climbed. Every time my name went along for the ride. I'd been signing where Brett pointed for years, trusting it was routine, the way I'd been trained to trust. That was the first night I'd laid the whole history out flat and actually read it. The house my parents bragged they bought their son outright was leveraged to the rafters. And the only reason it hadn't collapsed was the daughter quietly covering the months it came up short. I wasn't the family's charity case. I was its foundation. They just built the whole house facing the other way so nobody ever had to look at me. I found the original closing folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. Soft at the corners from 11 years of moving it but never opening it. I made coffee. I sat down and read every page the way I read a patient's chart. Slowly. Looking for what matters. Page 4 was the note. And there, beside my brother's looping signature, was mine. Georgia Palmer. 23 years old. In blue ink. Careful. The signature of a girl who thought she was finally being trusted with something. Co-borrower. Not cosigner. Owner. I sat with my finger on it a long while. Then I took out the notebook and added it all up for the first time. I'd never let myself do the total before. $71,420. That was what I'd quietly poured into Brett's house to keep it standing. $71,000, in a family where I'd had to pay my own apartment deposit out of tips at 18. I didn't cry over it. I just looked at page 4 and the blue signature and the number, and I understood that I'd been telling myself the wrong story my entire life. The story where I was the one who took, when all along the ledger ran the other way. Hold on to those 3 things. Page 4. My name beside his. $71,420. Everything that happened at that Christmas table came down to those 3 things, and only one person in the family knew they existed. Me. I called Aaron the next morning and told him to start building the case. The recovery action, the petition. I wanted to know what it would take to sue Brett for the $71,000 and force the house to a sale. And I wanted the family to feel it coming. He warned me again, gently, a lawsuit would tie me to all of them for a year or more. I said I understood. Word got out the way it does in families. Ashley heard I'd hired a lawyer. My mother called, rattled, demanding to know if I was really going to drag my brother to court over a house. I didn't deny it. I let them sit with it. Let them imagine the courtroom, the public unspooling of everything they'd hidden. I'm not proud of how good that felt. Then one morning, I caught myself rehearsing my testimony in the shower, arguing with a Brett who wasn't even in the room, the water gone cold. I'd spent 34 years living inside that family's kitchen. Now I was drawing up plans to build a new room onto it, one with a witness stand. That was when it hit me. A lawsuit would put me in a room with Brett's lawyer for a year. It would keep my name welded to that house through every hearing. I'd still be holding the house. Just in a different building with worse lighting. I was so tired of holding the house. So I went to see Patricia. She was 91 and sharper than people half her age. She still made tea like it was a ceremony. I told her everything. The sale. The house. The signature. The lawyer. The $71,000. She listened with her hands folded, missing nothing. When I finished, she didn't tell me I was right, which is what family is supposed to do. She asked me a question instead. Georgia, she said, do you want to win, or do you want to be free? I opened my mouth to say both. She held up one finger before I could. They're not the same thing. Winning keeps you in the ring. Free means you walk out. She sipped her tea. You've been in the ring your whole life, sweetheart. Even your revenge is a way of staying in it. The lawsuit, the courtroom, making them watch. That's still you performing for people who never clapped. I sat very still. You don't owe anybody your spine. Not your money, not your years, not the next 3 years in a courthouse proving a point they'll never admit you won. Don't fight them for the house. Just stop holding it up and let the house tell them the truth you've been too kind to say. Something turned over in me, quiet and final. I'd been planning to throw the whole weight of that house at my family. Patricia was telling me to simply set it down and step back and watch. For 11 years, I'd been the thing keeping it from falling. The most powerful thing I could do was nothing. I just had to stop. I drove home with Patricia's question turning in me. And somewhere on that gray highway, it clicked. I didn't need to sue anyone. I didn't need a courtroom or a public reckoning or a single raised voice. I just needed to stop being the floor. Here's what I understood. For 11 years, the only thing keeping Brett's house standing was me quietly curing the shortfalls so the loan never defaulted. If I simply stopped, the house would come due on its own. Brett would fall behind the way he always did, and this time no quiet check would appear to save him. The only way out for him would be the door I'd been pointing at for a decade, refinance into his own name. Which he could not do. Without me, the math had only one answer. The house would have to be sold. And when it's sold, my name would finally, cleanly, come off it. I'd be free. Not through a fight. Through subtraction. The revenge my family would never see coming wasn't an attack. It was an absence. I would simply remove the one thing they'd never noticed was there. A nurse doesn't break the body to make a point. She stops propping up what was never healthy and lets it find its own level. My family had spent 34 years insisting I didn't need anything, and the golden son needed everything. Fine. I'd give them exactly the family they'd designed. One where I gave nothing. And we'd all finally see who'd been holding whom. I called Aaron and told him I'd changed direction. No lawsuit. He went quiet for a second. Then I heard something like respect in his voice. I told him I wanted to do 2 simple, lawful things. First, I would stop covering Brett's shortfalls, effective immediately. No more quiet checks. Second, I wanted to notify the loan servicer in writing that I would no longer be curing payments on the account, and to formally request the process for releasing my interest. You're within your rights on both, Aaron said. You're not required to subsidize a co-borrower forever. He helped me draft the letter that afternoon. It was short and unremarkable, the kind of letter that changes a life without raising its voice. I notified the servicer of my position. I requested a payoff quote and the requirements for removing my name. I made clear in plain language that any future shortfall would not be covered by me. I signed it. Georgia Palmer. The same name from page 4. 11 years older. Then I mailed it 4 days before Christmas. I want you to notice when this happened. The decisive thing, the real turn of this whole story, didn't happen at the dinner table. It happened in a quiet post office on a Wednesday with no one watching. No speech. No gotcha. By the time I drove down to Dayton for Christmas, it was already done. The floor was already gone. The house was already falling. They just couldn't feel it yet. I'd be sitting at that table by the broken door when the first crack reached them. And the only thing I planned to do was tell the truth calmly, one time, and leave. The early gathering that Sunday, the ham and the gold-rimmed plates and the chair by the door, that's when the money came out. We were halfway through dinner when Ashley set down her fork, looked across the table at me with a bright terrible smile, and set it for the room. So, are we not going to talk about Georgia's $25 million? The starburst clock ticked into the silence. My father stopped chewing. My mother's hand went to her collar. Brett looked at me like I'd been hiding a second head. So I told them plainly, because there was no point hiding it now. I'd built a company. I'd sold it. It was a good number. I kept it short and unbothered the way Patricia taught me. And I watched the temperature of the room change in real time. My mother's shock lasted about 4 seconds before it turned into something else. Calculation. I'd seen that look on her face my whole life. She reached across and put her hand over mine, warm and damp. "Sweetheart," she said, "that's such a blessing for this family." This family. Not me. The family. Then softer, the old law dusted off and aimed, "And your brother's struggling so much right now. You don't need it. He does." There it was again. The whole creed of my childhood set over a ham I could have bought 100 of. I didn't pull my hand away. I just looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain why she was wrong. It moved fast after that, the way these things do once a number is on the table. My father cleared his throat and started talking about keeping wealth in the family. Brett, emboldened, leaned in. "Look, I'd never ask," he said, asking. "But the house has been tight. If you floated me something, even a loan." He named a figure. Then a bigger one. By the end of the meal, a loan had become your fair share to give, as if my company had been a family project I'd selfishly cashed in alone. Ashley delivered the line they'd clearly rehearsed. "After everything your parents did for you growing up, you'd really let your own brother lose his house?" I almost admired the nerve of it. Everything my parents did for me. I ran the list silently. The apartment deposit they wouldn't co-sign. The tuition they paid him twice. The truck, the rent, the house with my name on it, the $4,000 of my savings and the down payment. Everything they did for me fit in a thimble. Everything they'd taken would fill that house to the roof. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet. Brett, watching me stay quiet, mistook it for weakening. "Family money comes home to family, Georgia," he said, like he was quoting wisdom instead of inventing it on the spot. "That's just how it works." I looked at my brother, who had never in his life refinanced his way out of anything, who was sitting in a house he didn't know was sinking, lecturing me about how money comes home. "Let me think about it," I said. And I meant it. I had one more thing to confirm before Christmas. My father followed me out to the porch as I was leaving. The storm door banged behind us, the latch catching on nothing the way it always had. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the yard, and for a moment he was just an old man in the cold. "Your mother shouldn't push like that," he said quietly. It was the closest thing to taking my side I'd heard in 34 years. "I know it hasn't been even," he went on, "between you and your brother. I do know that. Something in my chest loosened just slightly against my will. I waited. For 1 second, I thought my father was going to apologize, and I understood how badly I'd wanted that all my life. Then he sighed and ruined it. But you came out fine, Georgie. You always do. And Brett, he's not strong like you. He needs the help. We did what we had to do for the one who couldn't make it on his own. There it was. The same arithmetic, just wearing a sadder face. My strength had always been the reason to give me less. He told me then, almost as a confession, that he'd pulled the equity from his own house years ago to help Brett, that retirement was thinner than my mother knew, that he was scared. I fell for him, I did. But fear isn't a deed to my life. I'm sorry you're scared, Dad, I said. But you spent your safety net on the wrong son. I drove back to Columbus in the dark. He didn't ask which son I meant. The letter I'd mailed did its quiet work while the family was busy planning how to spend my money. 3 days before Christmas, the loan servicer processed my notice. The December payment came up short, the way it always did. But this time, no quiet check appeared from Columbus to cover it. For the first time in 11 years, the shortfall just sat there, and the account ticked over into delinquency. Brett got the notice in the mail that same week. He had no idea what had changed. He had no idea the change was me, finally absent. He called my parents in a panic instead of me, because in his mind I was the one with money now, not the one who'd been holding his house up all along. The irony was almost too clean. He spent that whole week believing his big sister was hoarding $25 million while refusing to help. Never once suspecting the help had been there silently the entire time and had simply stopped. My mother called me frantic, saying Brett's mortgage was somehow behind and the bank must have made a mistake. I let the call go to voicemail. There was no mistake. There was just, for the first time, the truth arriving on its own schedule. The house was already telling them. They just hadn't learned to read its handwriting yet. Brett finally called me himself the night before Christmas Eve. No exclamation points this time. He was shouting before I even said hello. The house was behind. The bank was sending letters. Did I know anything about this? Because the timing was awfully convenient, wasn't it, right after everyone found out about my money? I let him run out of steam. Then I said the calmest thing I've ever said to my brother. Brett. Refinance the house into your own name. Silence. Like I've been asking you to do for 11 years, I went on. Take my name off it. Make it yours. The way Mom and Dad always told everyone it already was. More silence. Then the smaller voice, the one underneath the shouting. I can't, he said. They told me I don't qualify. My credit, the income. I can't get approved on my own. And there it was. The first true thing my brother had said to me in years. I know, I said gently. You never could. That's why my name's been on it since you were 26. I could hear him trying to do the math he'd never had to do. Wait, he said. Your name? On my house? Our house, I said. Page 4. Co-borrower. I put $4,000 into the down payment and I've covered your shortfalls for 11 years. A long, awful pause. Then why is it behind now, he whispered. Because I stopped, I said. That's all. I just stopped. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just let my brother sit, for the first time in his life, inside a consequence. See you at dinner, I said. And I hung up. Of course Brett called our mother the second we hung up. And of course she called me. And of course she had already decided the villain of the story was me. How could you do this to your brother at Christmas? Not even a question. You're punishing him, she said. You always resented him. And now that you've got money, you're using it to ruin him. Out of jealousy. Jealousy. I'd spent $71,000 keeping her son's roof over his head, money she never knew about, and she'd found a way to call it jealousy. I'm not giving him anything and I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm just no longer paying for a house that was never supposed to be mine to pay for. She wasn't listening. She fell back on the oldest line she had. We did the best we could. We could only ever back one horse, Georgia. You know that. You are always going to be fine. The sentence that had shaped my entire childhood, now offered as a defense for letting her son drown in a debt I'd been bailing for a decade. For the first time, it didn't land like a wound. It landed like an admission. She told me the truth about this family 34 years ago, and I'd spent my whole life trying to prove her wrong by being indispensable. I was done proving it. I'll see you at dinner, Mom, I said. I called Aaron one last time on Christmas Eve morning, because I wanted to walk into that house knowing precisely what was true and saying nothing I couldn't stand behind. He was careful the way good lawyers are. You've lawfully stopped covering the shortfalls. The account is delinquent. If your brother can't bring it current and can't refinance into his own name, at some point the lender will move toward the remedies in the note. Which means, I said. Presumptively, the house gets sold to satisfy the loan. But understand the timeline isn't yours to control. No one can promise you exactly how or when it resolves. And my name? When the loan is paid off, whether by sale or refinance, your name comes off it. You walk away clean. That part is solid. That was all I needed. I wasn't going to that table to threaten anyone or promise outcomes I couldn't guarantee. I was going to tell them what I had done, what was true, and what I would no longer do. Then I was going to put on my coat and go home to a house that was mine fully, with no one else's name on it and no one else's weight on my back. I packed a small bag in case I needed to leave fast. I didn't plan to stay long. I'd say it once, calmly, in front of all of them. And then for the first time in 34 years, I'd let the door bang behind me and not turn around to fix the latch. Christmas dinner was at 6 and I arrived at 6 exactly, because I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of saying I was late on top of everything else. The house smelled the way it always did. Clove ham, pine, the ceramic Christmas tree on the sideboard with its little plastic light pegs. The starburst clock ticked over the table. The good china was out again, gold rims catching the light. 6 settings. Bread at the head. My chair by the door. Some things a family will never change, even as the floor goes out from under it. They were all there. My mother, tight-faced and righteous. My father, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Brett, gray and hollow, like a man who hadn't slept. Ashley perched beside him, watching me the way you watch whether you started. 2 aunts down the table who'd clearly been briefed and arranged their faces into disapproval. The whole jury assembled. I sat in my chair by the broken storm door. The latch ticked against the frame in the December wind, that small familiar rattle, the sound of the one thing in this house nobody but me ever bothered to hold shut. I folded my hands and waited. I'd learned a long time ago, sitting with frightened people in the dark, that you don't fill a silence to make yourself comfortable. You let it do its work. Brett didn't make it through grace. He set down his fork before the plates were even full and looked at me with eyes that were already wet. I'm going to lose the house, he said, his voice cracking on it. Do you understand that? They're going to take my house. I've got a wife. I've got a life there. And you're sitting on 25 million. He said the number like an accusation, like I'd stolen it from his pocket. You could fix this with one phone call and you won't. I kept my hands folded. How much do you think would fix it, Brett? He named it before he could stop himself. 15 million. The table went quiet. Even the aunts looked startled by the size of it. He'd asked for a loan 2 weeks ago. Now, panicked, he jumped to 15 of my 25, as if my 8 years of 100-hour weeks were a pot we were all meant to split. At least 15, he said quieter, hearing himself, to be safe. Then my brother, 37 years old, slid out of his chair at the head of the table and went down onto my mother's kitchen floor on his knees. Crying. Actually crying the way I hadn't seen since we were children. Please, he said. Please, Georgia. You're my sister. Don't let them take everything. And my mother, watching her son on the floor, turned the full force of 34 years on me. She stood up so fast her chair scraped. Look at what you're doing to him, she screamed. Look at your brother. You did this. You stole his future, Georgia. You walked in here with your money and you stole his future. The starburst clock ticked. The latch rattled. My brother wept on the linoleum and my mother screamed that I was a thief. Every face at that table turned to me, waiting to see me crumble or cave the way I always had. I didn't do either. I looked at all of them very calmly and felt, of all things, a kind of peace. Because I finally understood I was the only person in that room who knew what was actually true. And I was about to say it once, plainly, and never explain myself in this house again. I didn't raise my voice. The quieter you get, the louder a room has to become to hear you, until everyone is leaning in despite themselves. I want to say one thing, I said, and then I'm going to finish my dinner and go home. My mother kept standing, breathing hard. Brett looked up from the floor. That house, I said, nodding toward Brett's place across town, has had 2 names on the loan for 11 years. Brett's and mine. Silence. My father's head came up slowly. I'm not a cosigner, I said. I'm a co-borrower. I own half of it. I have since Brett was 26, when no bank on earth would lend to him a loan, and Mom and Dad drove to Columbus and asked me to put my name and $4,000 of my own savings on the line so the family could buy its son a house. I let that settle. And for 11 years, every time Brett came up short, I quietly covered it. $71,000 all told. None of you knew. That's the only reason that house never went under. Ashley had gone very pale. Brett's mouth was open. My mother's righteousness flickered just for a second into something like fear. Last week, I stopped. That's all I did. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't take $1 from any of you. I simply stopped paying for a house that was never supposed to be mine to carry. The only way my name comes off that loan now is if Brett refinances it into his own name. And we all know he can't. I looked at my brother on the floor. You didn't lose your future, Brett. You've been living on mine since you were 26. I just stopped lending it to you. My mother found her voice, thin and shaking. Family money comes home to family. You're right, I said. And for the first time all night, I let myself smile. Small and tired. It does. It's finally coming home. I picked up my fork. Nobody moved. The clock ticked. My father exhaled long and low, like a man who'd known the truth for 11 years and had only just been forced to hear it out loud. I took a bite of ham I'd practically paid for. It was very good. For a second, nobody in that kitchen knew what to do with a Georgia who didn't flinch. Then my mother did the only thing she knew how to do. She got louder. After everything we sacrificed. We did our best. We could only ever back one horse. I set down my fork and gave her the last thing I had to say, gently, because it wasn't an attack. It was just, finally, the truth. You said you could only ever back one horse, Mom. You were right. But you spent 34 years staring at the wrong end of the stable. You never once noticed which one of us was actually carrying the whole barn. She stopped. The aunts looked at their plates. Ashley had slid an inch away from Brett, the way people do when they realize they bet on a losing hand. And my brother, still half on the floor, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not anger. Not even fear. Recognition. The dawning, 11 years late, of who I'd actually been to him all along. I stood up. The chair by the broken door scraped back. The latch rattled in the wind. That old familiar sound, the one nobody but me had ever bothered to hold against the cold. I wasn't going to hold it tonight. I put on my coat. My mother was still talking, the words getting smaller, the way a storm sounds once you've driven past it. I'm not angry at any of you, I said from the doorway. And I meant it, which surprised me most of all. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to sue. I've spent my whole life in this family's ring, and I'm finally walking out of it. I looked at Brett. I hope you figure out the house. I really do. But I won't be the one who figures it out for you. Not anymore. I looked at my parents. Don't call me about money. I won't answer. If you ever want to call me about anything else, anything that isn't a number, I'll pick up. The choice is yours. It always was. Then I opened the storm door and the wind caught it. The broken latch banged against the frame the way it had my whole life. For 34 years, I'd been the one who turned around to ease it shut, to fix what no one else would fix, to hold the cold out so everyone inside stayed comfortable. I stepped out onto the porch. I let the door swing. I didn't turn around. I didn't reach back. And behind me, I heard it bang once, twice, loose and rattling. Then I was down the steps and into the cold, clean dark. And for the first time in my life, the latch was somebody else's problem. Here's how it landed, since I know you want to know. Brett couldn't refinance. Of course he couldn't. The servicer sent the notices, gave Brett a window to bring the loan current, and waited. He couldn't cure it. There was no quiet check coming from Columbus anymore. By 3 months into the new year, the lender moved to recover what it was owed, and the house went up for sale to pay off the note. It sold in the spring to a young couple with a baby on the way, which I liked, because at least the maple tree would get to shade somebody who'd earned it. When the loan paid off at closing, my name came off the note at last. 11 years, gone with a single line on a settlement statement. I was free. My father's retirement was thinner than my mother ever understood, and they downsized to a smaller place, quietly, the way they'd done everything that embarrassed them. Ashley left Brett within the year. It turned out her loyalty had been to a house and a status, and once those were gone, so was she. Brett rents now, the way I did at 18. And I hear he's finally learning the arithmetic the rest of us learned long ago. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was no triumph in watching a family I'd loved come apart along the seams they'd sewn themselves. But I slept. God, I slept. I took the money I'd kept and did one thing with a piece of it that mattered to me. I started a scholarship for CNAs, women putting themselves through certification the way I had, and I named it for Patricia Vance. She came to the first ceremony in a wheelchair, 92 and fierce. When they read her name, she gripped my hand and said, "There. Now that's family money coming home." We both laughed until we cried. My parents weren't there. They didn't know. And for the first time, that absence didn't feel like a wound. It just felt like quiet. The good kind. I learned something at that table I wish I'd known at 18, sitting in the drafty chair by the door. You can love people with your whole heart and still refuse to be the floor they stand on. You can be the strongest one in the room and still set the room down. And the day you finally stop catching everyone who was happy to let you fall, you discover the thing they never wanted you to know. That you were never the one who needed holding up. You can stand. You always could. That's how one quiet daughter took her name back. The Good China. Page 4. $71,000 nobody ever thanked her for. If you've ever been the net a family forgot to see, hear me. You're allowed to stop catching. Subscribe, and share this with someone still holding a house that was never theirs to carry.